They lied to you. Your conscience isn't just a little angel whispering right or wrong on your shoulder. It's a living, breathing presence, a voice older than your name, deeper than your thoughts, and far more powerful than your so-called logic. And while the modern world preaches freedom, success, and just be yourself, few dare to ask, who exactly is that self you're obeying? Carl Jung did, and what he discovered turns most pop spirituality upside down. What if your guilt isn't weakness, but wisdom? What if the conflict inside you isn't pathology, but a sacred dialogue between the ego and something greater? We've been trained to silence that voice, to bury our dreams, to deny the unconscious. But the cost: depression, numbness, identity crises, and a soul that whispers, "This isn't who I really am." This video cracks open the psychology they never taught you in school, the kind that pulls no punches because it knows the battlefield isn't out there, it's inside. If you've ever felt torn between what you want and what feels right, if you've ignored a dream that haunted you for days, or if you've buried guilt so deep it shows up as anxiety, this is for you. We're going to explore the real mechanics of conscience, shadow, guilt, and moral freedom. You won't get rules. You'll get understanding. You won't find dogma. You'll find self-trust. And maybe, just maybe, you'll finally hear that voice within and recognize it for what it is. The self calling you home. Chapter 1. Conscience and the Voice Within. There's something unmistakable about that quiet voice inside us. The one that whispers when no one's looking, pokes at us after a harsh word, or tugs gently when we turn away from someone in need. Carl Jung didn't see this as superstition or moral conditioning. He understood it as the living edge of the self pressing up against the ego, demanding authenticity. This voice, our conscience, isn't just a nag. It's the thread connecting our conscious choices with the deeper ocean of the unconscious. And whether or not we listen determines how aligned we feel with our inner truth, or how tormented we become by guilt. Most people think of guilt as something to avoid, like a bad smell or a lecture from an angry parent. But Jung saw guilt differently. He believed it to be a sign that we are brushing up against a boundary, a moral struggle between the ego and the self. That sting in your chest after betraying a friend, that's not weakness. That's your conscience registering an internal split. When ignored, this guilt festers, mutating into anxiety, depression, or numbness. But when honored, it becomes a compass, one pointing not to perfection, but to integration. In practical terms, this means noticing the little tugs during the day. Did you lie to keep things smooth? Did you hold back compassion because pride got in the way? Your conscience catches these moments not to punish, but to realign. A simple practice: before bed, jot down one moment that didn't sit right with you. Not to judge it, just to see it. Over time, you'll begin to hear your inner voice more clearly. This isn't therapy, it's spiritual hygiene. Jung tied this inner compass to the idea of the divine, not necessarily God as religion paints it, but something sacred within. The conscience is like a whisper from the infinite, echoing through the cavern of the unconscious. It reflects not just personal morality, but an archetypal blueprint that wants you to grow. This is why conscience often feels bigger than logic or culture. It's not about social rules. It's about your soul remembering itself. And when we follow it, we don't just feel better. We become more real. Still, it's not always easy to trust that voice. The ego, with all its projections, will dress up comfort as wisdom. It'll rationalize choices that feel safe but aren't aligned. And that's where the deeper work begins, where emotional intelligence meets moral responsibility. Because the conscience doesn't just nudge. It demands a kind of courage that scares the ego. But hidden in that fear lies the doorway to something else, something the unconscious has been trying to show us all along. Chapter 2. Dreams and Symbolism. People love to dismiss dreams as nonsense, random, weird, or just leftovers from the day. But Carl Jung flipped that idea on its head. He believed that dreams are anything but random. In fact, they're coded messages from the unconscious, speaking in the ancient language of symbols. Think of your dream life as a secret conversation between the self and the ego. The more you pay attention, the more fluent you become in this symbolic language, and the more clarity you gain about what's truly going on beneath the surface. Let's say you dream about being chased through an abandoned city. That's not just a stress response. That's your unconscious trying to say, hey, there's something you're avoiding. The city could represent your own inner world, abandoned, perhaps, by parts of yourself you've neglected. And the pursuer? Often a shadow aspect, something you've pushed away but that still carries energy you need. Jung taught that confronting these dream elements could transform fear into insight and confusion into emotional intelligence. It's the psyche's way of offering spiritual growth wrapped in metaphor. So how do you work with dreams? Don't overcomplicate it. Keep a notebook by your bed. As soon as you wake, write whatever you remember, no matter how small or strange. Over time, patterns emerge. If you keep dreaming about water, start asking what emotional depths you're avoiding. If animals keep showing up, you may be dealing with instincts, power, or the emergence of an archetype like the animus or anima. The point isn't to solve the dream, but to listen, to begin a relationship with your unconscious. And yes, symbols can be tricky. One person's snake is another person's wisdom. This is where moral struggle and conscience come into play. Your dream won't always hand you a tidy answer. It may disturb you, make you question your identity, your morality, your desires. But this is the whole point. The dream invites you to confront what the ego avoids. It's shadow work in motion, not as a punishment, but as a call to deeper integration and authenticity. Jung often warned that ignoring your dreams is like throwing away unopened mail from your soul. Each dream is a psychic telegram, stamped with urgency from the unconscious. They won't stop coming. They'll just grow louder, stranger, and sometimes darker. And when they do, that's usually a sign. The self is preparing for a confrontation with the ego, a showdown that might just unlock something ancient and powerful within you. Chapter 3. The Struggle Between Ego and Self. At the heart of Jungian psychology lies a tension that every soul knows intimately, even if they can't name it. It's the push and pull between ego and self. The ego, that chatty little manager in your head, wants control, certainty, and a clear identity. Meanwhile, the self, the deeper, unified core of your being, doesn't care much for labels or comfort zones. It wants wholeness. And often, these two forces clash in ways that leave us confused, exhausted, or stuck in loops of guilt and self-doubt. Ever try to make a decision that made sense but felt wrong deep down? That's ego logic smashing into self-truth. You might pick the stable job over the meaningful one, or stay in a relationship that looks perfect on paper. But inside, the conscience protests. This isn't just indecision, it's a moral struggle. Carl Jung called it the individuation process, the journey of aligning your conscious mind with a blueprint of your unconscious. It's messy, it's humbling, but it's also how real psychological health begins to unfold. The ego doesn't like uncertainty. It clings to identity. I'm successful. I'm a good person. I always do the right thing. But when the unconscious starts pushing symbols, dreams, or guilt into awareness, it threatens that stability. Suddenly you're faced with aspects of yourself that don't fit the persona you've curated. You start noticing projections, blaming others for traits you're hiding from yourself. And here's the tricky part. The ego wants to defend its image, while the self wants to evolve. Only one of them can lead. One way to bridge the gap: Practice radical honesty with yourself. Ask uncomfortable questions. Why did that comment bother me so much? What am I afraid people will find out? Then listen, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Meditation helps, but even more practical is journaling, therapy, or conversations where you dare to drop the mask. You might discover that what you thought was weakness is actually anima energy rising, or that what you've labeled as arrogance is just a wounded animus crying for recognition. The real kicker? Most people never realize this struggle is happening. They call it bad luck, burnout, or a rough patch. But what if it's not just chaos? What if it's the self calling out through conflict, begging you to stop performing and start integrating? Because until you face that internal civil war, the ego will keep resisting the very thing the soul has been dreaming about all along. Chapter 4. Moral Freedom and Free Will. Everyone loves the idea of free will. It flatters the ego, makes us feel like we're steering the ship. But Carl Jung wasn't so easily convinced. He believed that much of what we call choice is actually the unconscious pulling the strings behind the curtain. Sure, you think you're choosing the salad over the burger out of health-conscious wisdom. But what if it's guilt, shame, or some forgotten projection running the show? Real moral freedom, Jung suggested, doesn't begin with choice. It begins with awareness. Let's be honest. How often do we act out of habit, fear, or desire for approval? You say yes to something you don't want to do, then resent it. You stay silent to avoid conflict, then stew in frustration. This isn't free will, it's programming. Jung argued that unless we've done shadow work, our decisions are just reflexes masquerading as virtue. True freedom requires knowing your inner patterns, especially the ones that trigger guilt, moral struggle, and emotional dissonance. Otherwise, you're just a puppet with a very convincing ego. Think of it this way. The unconscious is like an iceberg beneath the ship of your life. You can steer all you want on the surface, but if you're unaware of what lies below, eventually something's going to crash. That's why developing psychological health and emotional intelligence matters. It helps you detect those submerged patterns. A great start: track your recurring mistakes without shame. Where do you keep tripping up morally? Where do you make bad choices and then feel a pang of guilt? That's your unconscious leaving breadcrumbs. Now, Jung wasn't saying we're doomed to be victims of our inner chaos. Quite the opposite. He believed that by becoming aware of the unconscious, we could reclaim power. Not the kind of power that dominates, but the power to choose with clarity. That's the essence of free will. Choosing in alignment with the self, not just the ego. And that requires patience, humility, and a deep willingness to face your shadows without flinching. Not to crush them, but to integrate them. This is why so many people feel trapped, even when they technically have freedom. The job, the relationship, the lifestyle. It all looks good, but something feels off. That's the unconscious signaling that what you call freedom might just be a cage with fancy wallpaper. And the only way out? A confrontation with the archetypes that dwell within. A symbolic battle that leads not to certainty, but to real moral agency. Chapter 5. The Role of Archetypes in Psychological Health. You've met them before, even if you didn't know their names. The lover, the warrior, the mother, the wise old man. These are archetypes, and according to Carl Jung, they're the deep patterns of human experience encoded in the unconscious. They show up in myths, religions, movies, and in your own dreams and behavior. When these archetypes remain unconscious, they tend to possess us. But when we become aware of them, they become tools for psychological health, emotional intelligence, and spiritual growth. Take the anima and animus, for example. These are inner representations of the opposite gender that live in every psyche. For a man, the anima often appears through moods, intuition, or emotional sensitivity. For a woman, The animus may emerge as inner authority or intellectual confidence. If repressed or projected, they distort relationships. But when integrated, they bring depth, empathy, and wholeness. That's not just theory, that's transformation. Next time you're overwhelmed by attraction, irrational anger, or confusion in love, ask, is this really me, or an archetype acting out? Working with archetypes isn't about controlling them. It's about dialoguing with them. Start by noticing patterns. Are you always the hero, rescuing others while ignoring your own needs? Or the rebel, always resisting structure? These aren't just habits. They're psychic energies. The key is to witness them without judgment. Jung suggested active imagination as one tool. Visualizing conversations with these inner figures, writing letters to them, or even drawing them. It might sound strange, but it taps into the unconscious in a way logic can't touch. And it matters deeply. Ignoring archetypes leads to imbalance. You might develop an inflated ego, repress your conscience, or fall in a moral struggle without understanding why. But when these energies are made conscious, you begin to see the architecture of your own mind. The ego softens. Emotional intelligence increases. You start making choices not out of compulsion, but from clarity. You become more whole, not perfect, but integrated. Less of a puppet, more of a conductor working in harmony with a vast inner orchestra. This process, of course, doesn't happen overnight. Archetypes aren't light switches, they're living forces. And once awakened, they don't just sit quietly. They challenge, provoke, and sometimes unsettle your identity. But that discomfort, it's a sign of growth, a sign that your unconscious is inviting you to see more, to discover what's been hidden in plain sight all along. Chapter 6. Guilt and Moral Struggle. Guilt isn't just a burden, it's a message. Carl Jung viewed guilt not as a moral failure, but as a psychological signal that something in the psyche is out of alignment. It's the conscience raising a red flag when the ego strays from the path of the self. You feel it in your chest, like a weight or a quiet ache that doesn't go away with excuses. It's not there to punish, it's there to wake you up. Guilt, in this light, becomes one of the most honest emotions we have. Think about the last time you felt guilty. Maybe it was something small, interrupting someone, breaking a promise, staying silent when you should have spoken up. Now ask yourself, was that moment really about what happened? Or was it about a part of you feeling disrespected or unseen by your own behavior? Jung believed that guilt often points to a deeper moral struggle between the ego's choices and the self's expectations. It's the emotional consequence of betraying your internal moral code, whether you admit it or not. But here's the catch. We often deal with guilt the wrong way. Some people suppress it, acting like it doesn't matter. Others wallow in it, turning it into self-punishment. Neither helps. The goal isn't to avoid guilt, it's to listen to it. If you feel guilt after gossiping, for instance, don't just promise to stop. Ask why you did it. Was it projection? Was it envy? Was it need for validation? That kind of self-inquiry transforms guilt into growth. It turns shame into conscience and moral struggle into spiritual direction. Guilt, then, becomes a teacher. It's not just about what's right or wrong. It's about congruence with your deeper self. Jung would say that ignoring guilt is like ignoring pain from a wound. It doesn't go away. It just festers. And over time, repressed guilt becomes depression, anxiety, or chronic emotional dissonance. That's why emotional intelligence isn't just about regulating feelings. It's about understanding what they're trying to tell you. Guilt is your inner compass saying, you're off course. Adjust. This is especially important in a world that encourages ego over essence, image over integrity. The more disconnected we are from our inner life, the easier it is to violate our conscience and then numb out. But guilt won't stay quiet forever. It waits. It simmers. Until one day, It forces us to look in the mirror and begin a deeper reckoning with the forces inside us that we've been too busy, too afraid, or too proud to confront. Chapter 7. Religion and the Will of God. When people hit a moral wall, they often look up, whether it's praying in desperation or searching sacred texts for answers. Religion steps in where conscience feels overwhelmed. Carl Jung didn't dismiss this tendency. He honored it. He saw religion not as superstition, but as a symbolic structure through which the unconscious expresses itself. The idea of the will of God, in Jungian terms, often reflects the deeper voice of the self, trying to guide the ego toward integrity and inner wholeness. But let's not romanticize it. Religion can both awaken and imprison. For some, it becomes a sacred mirror, helping them interpret guilt, dreams, and moral struggle in a meaningful way. For others, it becomes rigid dogma that replaces self-inquiry with blind obedience. The difference? Emotional intelligence. If you're using God as a scapegoat for your choices, God told me to do this. It's not my will, it's His. You're outsourcing your moral freedom. Jung would challenge that. He'd say, whose God are you hearing? And does it sound like your conscience or your ego in disguise? The healthiest spiritual paths invite dialogue with the divine, not dependency. They encourage shadow work, honest confession, and the integration of archetypes like the wise old man, the hero, or even the trickster. Religion, when internalized, becomes a moral ecosystem where symbols come alive. You don't just follow commandments, you confront projections. You don't just seek salvation, you face the unconscious. That's not easy, but it's real, and it brings guilt, morality, and identity into meaningful alignment. One powerful practice: reflect on your personal image of God. Is it a punishing father, a distant force, a loving presence, or something else entirely? That image reveals your psychological architecture. Jung suggested that God images evolve with our consciousness. As your relationship with the unconscious deepens, so does your conception of the divine. And that, in turn, reshapes how you interpret moral responsibility, not as obedience to an external authority, but as fidelity to your own integrated self. Ultimately, Jung believed that the will of God isn't found in avoiding sin. It's found in the courage to become whole. That might mean going through guilt, confronting projections, and challenging moral certainties that no longer serve. Religion, in this way, becomes a sacred container, not for controlling behavior, but for transforming it. And once that inner transformation begins, something fascinating tends to follow: the emergence of a different kind of voice, one less divine command and more archetypal confrontation. Chapter 8. Nietzsche and Moral Relativity. Nietzsche didn't come to play. Well, he declared that God is dead. He wasn't cheering. He was warning. With the collapse of traditional religious values, people were left to navigate morality without a compass. Carl Jung picked up where Nietzsche left off, recognizing that once external moral structures dissolve, we're forced to face the wild terrain of the psyche. No more rules, no more easy answers, just conscience, shadow, and the terrifying freedom of having to decide what kind of person you want to become. This is where moral relativity gets tricky. Nietzsche saw morality as a construct, something shaped by history, power, and culture. He urged people to become creators of their own values. But Jung took it a step deeper. What if your values aren't truly yours until you've confronted your unconscious? Until you've faced your projections, integrated your shadow, and reconciled anima and animus? You're not creating morality. You're recycling it. Emotional intelligence becomes your only shield against turning relativism into chaos. Take the person who claims to follow their truth, but burns every bridge in the process. Or the one who throws off guilt by dismissing it as social conditioning. That's not individuation. That's avoidance dressed as authenticity. Jung warned that abandoning all external morality without cultivating internal conscience leads to spiritual narcissism. You end up worshiping the ego instead of the self. And instead of freedom, you get fragmentation, where identity becomes a performance rather than an expression of integrated being. The real challenge: creating a moral framework that honors both freedom and depth. One that listens to conscience without becoming enslaved by guilt, and that explores the unconscious without falling into moral anarchy. You might ask, what principles would I still hold if no one were watching? That's where Nietzsche's Will to Power meets Jung's moral struggle. And the power in question isn't over others. It's the power to govern yourself with truth, responsibility, and psychological health. So the next time you're tempted to throw out tradition, pause. Ask yourself if you're rejecting an illusion or running from your own shadow. Jung didn't ask you to return to old religions. He asked you to confront the gods within, to let the unconscious reveal a morality born not from fear, but from self-awareness. And that kind of morality, it doesn't come with commandments. It comes with dreams, guilt, archetypes, and a deeper call that you're just beginning to hear. Chapter 9. Psychological Health Through Emotional Intelligence. When we talk about psychological health, people usually think of therapy, stress management, or maybe getting enough sleep. Important? Absolutely. But Carl Jung pointed towards something deeper, something at the core of emotional well-being: integration. And the gateway to that integration? Emotional intelligence. It's not just about controlling emotions. It's about understanding what they mean, where they come from, and how they guide you through the maze of conscience, ego, and the unconscious. Think of your emotions as messengers from the self. Anger might signal a boundary violation. Sadness could point to a disconnection from meaning. Even envy can reveal neglected parts of your identity, the ones you projected onto others. Jung taught that if you ignore these signals, you remain split. The shadow grows, guilt festers, and you live at the mercy of unacknowledged archetypes. But when you develop emotional intelligence, those same emotions become teachers, offering insights that logic alone can't provide. Want to build that intelligence? Start simple. Name what you're feeling, and then ask why. Practice pausing before reacting. Journal not just about what happened, but what it stirred in you. Read Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul, or Goleman's Emotional Intelligence to sharpen your awareness. And above all, treat your emotions not as enemies, but as guides from the unconscious. They're not random. They're deeply symbolic. They carry the myths, the archetypes, even the moral dilemmas that shape who you are becoming. What's fascinating is how emotional intelligence ties into individuation. As you learn to hold conflicting emotions, love and rage, guilt and desire, you become less fragmented. You stop chasing perfection and start embodying wholeness. The conscience no longer shouts over repressed guilt. It becomes a calm, inner compass. The ego no longer dominates, it dialogues. The self no longer hides, it leads. This isn't just mental health, it's spiritual growth. And it's where the real healing begins. Because in the end, emotional intelligence isn't just about feeling better. It's about seeing deeper. It's how you distinguish between a passing mood and a call from the unconscious. It's how you hear the animus whispering in doubt, or the anima grieving in silence. And once you learn that language, the psyche begins to open new doors that just might lead to a new kind of voice entirely, one that speaks not in symbols or struggles, but in stillness. Conclusion: what you need is emotional intelligence. So what's stopping you from listening to that inner voice now? The one that speaks not in commands, but in symbols, dreams, discomforts, and sometimes silence. Carl Jung didn't hand us a list of rules to follow. He gave us a mirror, and behind it a map. But that map only works if you're brave enough to ask the hard questions. What am I avoiding? What guilt am I numbing? What part of me have I disowned in the name of control or success? Because deep down, the real danger isn't in facing the unconscious. It's in running from it. You don't need more self-help tips or spiritual cliches. You need integration. You need emotional intelligence that goes beyond good vibes and gets its hands dirty in your moral struggle. So next time guilt taps your shoulder or a dream leaves you shaken, don't dismiss it. Sit with it. Ask what it's trying to show you. Because what you think is a problem might be a message from the self. And what you think is just life happening might be the unconscious trying to evolve you. If only you'd stop and listen. So tell me, what's your conscience really trying to say? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's make this a space where real questions are asked and real insights are shared. If this journey into Jung's universe cracks something open in you, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We're just getting started, and the self, as always, has more to say.